Rock stars are known for being unpredictable, but every once in a while they do something so wildly off-brand that the move itself becomes iconic. Brian May isn't just the guitarist for one of rock and roll's greatest bands, he's also an astrophysicist. He was a grad student in physics when Queen started to make it big, so his education got, delayed. But he eventually turned in his dissertation and earned his doctorate in 2007. For that dissertation, now Dr. May studied zodiacal dust, which, if you don't know, and most of us don't, is the interplanetary cloud of microscopic cosmic dust. Space dust, basically, which actually sounds very rock and roll. These days, though, May is more interested in asteroids and worked on the team that successfully sent a lander to take samples of the asteroid Bennu.
Well, we need to know what would happen if one of these asteroids hits the Earth. We need also to try and avoid that happening.
Brian May is on it, and he seems very proud to be a space nerd. The orbiting bodies that surround him during his special effects-laden guitar solos, they're projections of real asteroids. May also has earthly interests. On his property south of London, he operates Amazing Grace, a wildlife sanctuary dedicated to rehabilitating injured hedgehogs. Small and nearsighted hedgehogs are extremely vulnerable creatures. The ones who come to May are given veterinary care and released into Hedgehog Heaven, a sort of halfway house where they can recover free of predators and other dangers before being released back into the wild, where they can get back to collecting coins and unlocking new levels. Not sure that's right. I'll check on that later. Anyway, once back in their natural habitat, they presumably have trouble convincing the other hedgehogs that they went to live with Brian May for a few weeks. If you asked 1,000 people if they'd rather be a rock star or have a desk job, more people than you think would opt for the desk job. But The Who's Pete Townshend managed to do both, become one of rock and roll's biggest stars and hold down a so-called normal job, at least for a while. Townshend worked as an editor at the British publisher Faber & Faber, though since he was rich and famous, he only went in 2 days a week. When you think about it, it makes sense that a songwriter would be interested in the book world. Even before he worked at Faber & Faber, Townshend set up his own small press, Eel Pie publishing works of short fiction and poetry. He also opened a bookstore. The guy loved books. Faber & Faber hired him as an acquisitions editor, basically a book scout and buyer for the publishing house, in an effort to up the brand's cool factor. So it's entirely possible that a hopeful author may have gotten a rejection letter from Pete Townshend, an international rock star with a day job, because he thought their story was unbelievable. By 2005, Gwen Stefani had made a handful of gutsy, successful career moves. She replaced John Spence as lead singer of No Doubt after his death in 1987, then went on hiatus from No Doubt to pursue a solo career. In 2005, Stefani recruited a quartet of Japanese women to follow her around as a sort of traveling hype crew. She renamed them Love, Angel, Music, and Baby after Stefani's album. They were collectively referred to as the Harajuku Girls, an homage to the Tokyo district that was, at the time, the epicenter of Japanese street fashion. Stefani referred to the women as figments of her imagination, which was a bold statement considering that we could all see them. Stefani's entourage left her open to accusations of cultural appropriation and the other usual things that follow that. As far as we know, the Harajuku Girls didn't have to take the gig, but still. Not to mention that it was really creepy for a rich white lady to announce that she'd imagined some Japanese women who were following her around rather than acknowledge that she'd hired 4 real Japanese women to, follow her around.
And your name, sir?
This is gonna be fun. I'm the artist formerly known as Prince.
Prince defies genre and gender throughout his career, so perhaps it was inevitable that he would transcend the alphabet. In 1993, the Purple One announced that he would now be designated by the love symbol, which is unpronounceable. Nobody knew what to call him until promoters and DJs settled on the artist formerly known as Prince.
Well, I didn't choose that. That was chosen
for you.
Yeah, pretty much.
Some people mocked Prince for the name change, but he had a very savvy reason for doing it.
I wanted to make a change and move to a new plateau in my life, and one of the ways in which I did that was to change my name.
No. He did it for the best reason of all, money. He'd been contractually obligated to Warner Brothers since 1977. All that time, he cranked out good music that the label sat on, claiming that they didn't want to saturate the market. The fact that his name would forever be associated with a label that refused to release his music except on their own timetable infuriated Prince. He couldn't change the contract, so he dropped his name, knowing how much it would annoy the suits. When his contract finally lapsed in 2000, making the artist a free agent, he became Prince again.
You know how we've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bong.
Never fear, America. while you go about your daily life, Skunk Baxter has his eyes on the skies, protecting you from airborne attack. The memorably mustachioed Steely Dan and Doobie Brothers alum has always been involved in the tech side of recording. Well, it turns out that many of the basic concepts used to lay down musical tracks were originally developed for military purposes. Think data storage and transmission, among other things. Baxter talked about his interest to a neighbor, a retired military engineer, who gifted him a subscription to a weekly aviation magazine, and the musician was hooked. He taught himself enough about aviation and specifically missile defense that he wrote a short paper on the topic and handed it off to a sitting congressman.
I sat down at my Tandy 200 and wrote this paper about how to convert the Aegis weapon system to do theater missile defense.
From there, Baxter went to work for the U.S. government as a defense consultant and congressional advisor. His self-taught knowledge, combined with his artist's appetite for finding new ways to use technology, made him uniquely capable of sussing out and counteracting unusual security threats. And he still has the stash.
Explain what kind of a performer you are.
Okay, it's beyond words, of course.
Between her 4-octave vocal range and her outspoken contempt for authority, East German punk goddess Nina Hagen was destined to become an iconoclast. But she didn't start out as a singer. She wanted to be an actress, but the East German state wouldn't allow it. Hagen wasn't going to be ordered around, though. She concocted a borderline threatening exit application so that the East Germans couldn't wait to get rid of her. Rather than lock her up as an enemy of the state, though, they sent Hagen to West Germany. From there, she went to London, where she immersed herself in punk and ska culture before returning to West Germany to shock audiences with her sex and death-centric music and her offstage antics. She was so frank about sex on an Austrian chat show that the host got fired. As time went by, Hagen refused to mellow. She named her daughter Cosma because she was convinced she saw a UFO while she was pregnant. Then she went gospel, Hagen style, that is.
Jesus is the best. He'll put you through a test.
For someone whose entire public life was outside the norm, religious music was maybe the ultimate rebellion. In 2010, she released Personal Jesus, an album that combines spirituals with classic anti-establishment tracks. Just a Little Talk with Jesus shares space with Woody Guthrie's All You Fascists Bound to Lose, a particularly appropriate track for someone who grew up in Cold War East Germany.
You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose.
None of this was a gimmick on Hagen's part. She was baptized in 2009, and in 2026 she released another gospel album, Highway to Heaven, citing not Michael Landon, but rather the Holy Spirit as a close collaborator and noting the historical connections between gospel and rock music. This wasn't news to rock and roll OGs like Elvis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Sam Cooke, but good for Nina for tapping into the roots of rock.
Chris Gaines, is that the home improvement guy?
Chris Gaines is like a magic person.
Who's Chris Gaines?
Once upon a time, Garth Brooks wanted to be a rock star, but he was already famous for being, Garth Brooks. He's a rich, famous guy in America, though, so he has choices. Nobody was stopping him from releasing a rock album, but he wanted the full rock star experience, so he decided to play one in a movie. The plan was to first release the soundtrack, so to hype up the project, Brooks grew a soul patch, slapped on some sad boy bangs, and created an alter ego named Chris Gaines. He also decided that Gaines was Australian. But wait, there's more. Gaines then released an album complete with fictional liner notes outlining his make-believe career. It's not a bad idea, actually, except that nobody believed that Gaines was a real dude. Garth Brooks in Guyliner is still Garth Brooks. Even so, why wasn't it fun? Why did the whole thing, including Garth hosting an episode of Saturday Night Live with Gaines as the musical guest, feel like homework?
Our musical guest tonight is Chris Gaines. Yeah? No. See, I knew him before he made his first record.
And why did The Life of Chris Gaines still sell 2 million copies? Maybe Brooks took himself too seriously, or maybe he was a terrible actor. Either way, the movie never got made, and Chris Gaines was, in a way, a one-album wonder.
You probably think this song is about you.
Warren Beatty thinks he inspired Carly Simon's iconic kiss-off song You're So Vain, but she never confirmed whether or not it was Beatty who made eyes at himself in a mirror.
Carly Simon wrote the song You're So Vain about you.
How would I know?
There were other superstars in Simon's orbit, including Mick Jagger, Cat Stevens, David Bowie, and her ex-husband James Taylor, all of whom one might imagine annoying the young Simon.
You're so vain.
For decades, Simon coyly hinted at her subject's identity, but nobody knew for sure. In 2003, Simon decided to auction off, for charity, a private reveal of the subject's identity, with a caveat that it be kept secret except for a tiny hint. Simon's friend Dick Ebersole won and told fans the Notorious Man had an E in his name. which is no hint at all. But after a deep dive into Simon's history, it seems that there may be 3 inspirations for the So Vain Man, one for each verse. She seemed to confirm that Beatty was one of the tedious 3, but so far the identities of the other 2 remain a mystery. In 1988, a teenage Quebecois singing sensation named Celine Dion took the first step toward becoming a global superstar when she won Eurovision for Switzerland. If you don't have a map, I can assure you that Switzerland isn't in Canada, and Canada is not in Europe. Eurovision has famously convoluted rules that can vary from year to year and from country to country. To represent Switzerland in 1988, it was enough that the song be written by Swiss nationals. They could send anyone they wanted to sing it, so producers settled on the best French language voice they could find. That voice belonged to the then obscure Dion, who found herself in Dublin singing Ne partez pas sans moi for a country she'd never even visited. 6 points from Yugoslavia. Remember them? Gave her a 1-point edge over the UK, making Switzerland and Dion the night's big winners. Dion has since become an icon, and her Eurovision winning performance was just the beginning.